I'm an attorney. I graduated from the University of Chicago Law School in 1964. I've been a practicing lawyer since then, and I'm a member of the Bar of the State of New York and of the District of Columbia. I specialized in the 1970s in military law. I practiced military law in Asia and Europe. I later became the editor-in-chief of the Military Law Reporter in Washington for a number of years. And in the 70s and 80s, I was staff counsel of the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York City. I also, in the late 1980s, was an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice of the City University of New York, where I taught courses on propaganda and disinformation.
Have you also been involved in journalism and publishing?
Yes, I have. Since 1977 or 78, in addition to being a practicing lawyer, I've also been a journalist and a publisher and writer, specializing in intelligence-related matters and particularly their relationship to the media. For more than 20 years, I've been the co-publisher of a magazine called the Covert Action Quarterly, which particularly deals with reporting on intelligence agencies, primarily U.S. agencies, but also foreign. I published a magazine for a number of years called Lies of Our Times, which specifically was a magazine about propaganda and disinformation. And I've been the managing director of the Institute for Media Analysis for a number of years. I also, for about 20 years now, I think, was one of the principals in a publishing company called Sheridan Square Press that published books and pamphlets relating to intelligence and the media.
And you also write. You author articles and work.
Yes, I do. I've written dozens of articles on, particularly on media and intelligence. I've edited about 7 or 8 books on the subject. I've contributed sections to a number of other books, and many of my articles, of course, have been appeared in our own publications, but I've also had articles appear in around the world, including New York Times, Washington Post, and major media like those. I've appeared a lot on radio and television as an expert on intelligence and the media. I'm slowing down a bit now because I'm getting older, but I used to do a lot of speaking at universities and colleges around the country and debating government officials and people connected with organizations that supported the CIA and the other FBI and other intelligence agencies.
You have testified as an expert witness in the area of governmental use of media for disinformation and propaganda.
Yes, I have. I've testified as an expert in that field in both state and federal courts in this country. I've testified in foreign courts. I testified once before the United Nations on that subject and once before the U.S. Congress.
Schaap, I'm going to show you a copy of your own CD. It's a summary of your professional publication. I want you to confirm its accuracy.
Yes, that's my CD that I prepared.
Ron, we move the admission of Mr. Schaap's CV and move that he be accepted as an expert witness in the matter at hand for the issues of government use of media for disinformation and propaganda purposes.
Okay. I have nothing.
Number 28.
Schaap, in the course of your research, have you had occasion to study the use of the media by government agencies?
Yes, I have. I've studied many government reports on the subject. Many books have been written about it, articles, and in fact, I've written many of those articles.
Can you give the court and the jury a brief a summary of the subject indicating the extent to which this type of activity by government still takes place?
Yes, I can. I won't go into ancient history, but it should be noted that governments around the world have secretly used the media for their purposes for many hundreds of years, probably thousands, but certainly from the 16th and 17th century in England on, there's been a great deal of research about the use by governments, the secret use of the media. For our purposes, though, particularly relating to the U.S., the most significant and the first major deliberate program in this country was during World War I, when President Wilson set up an organization called the Committee for Public Information under a public relations executive man named George Creel. The purpose of this committee was to propagandize the war effort against Germany. This was created immediately after the U.S. entered World War I in 1917. And in propagandizing the war effort in war news, it was the policy of this committee to have no compunctions about falsifying the news whenever it was felt that that was necessary to help the war effort.
Can you give us an example of the type of falsification of the news that you're talking about?
Yes, the Committee for Public Information purported very often to release documents, supposedly genuine documents, to the press in order to substantiate whatever particular position the Wilson government might have been taking at the time. And one of the most famous that happened early in its creation in 1917 was a disinformation campaign to suggest that the Russian revolutionaries, Lenin in particular and Trotsky, were actually German agents being paid by the Kaiser. The government and Creel's committee made up the story. They created phony documents. They passed it all to friends in the major newspapers, and almost immediately this was front page news around the United States and around the world.
I'm going to show you a New York Times headline, that era, and see if that's the kind of falsification you're talking about.
Yes, this is, the rest of the text is from an article where that headline appeared, but that was on the front page of the New York Times in 1917. And later it transpired that the documents were forgeries that had been created by Mr. Creel. And of course, as was obvious by the current course of history, the Russian revolutionaries were hardly friends of the Kaiser,
Yes.
much less employees.
Can you continue with your summary?
Yes, after World War I, the U.S. continued to be or actually became the world's leader in the control of information. Britain had been more preeminent before World War I, but at the end of the war, the U.S. was really in control of all the world communication media. And disinformation was used by the government sporadically during the interwar years. It was particularly used in the Red Scares of the 1920s and the creation of disinformation suggesting various opponents of the government were communists. But it wasn't a major aspect of government policy until the advent of World War II. And that was when deliberate disinformation or a structure for emitting deliberate disinformation became very, very important.